Here, I'm not going to be talking a lot about Eric. There is no better person to describe himself than himself. I'm just going to be introducing the content of how beneficial it was for me. I'm part of the Vistage group members, and it's a members of CEOs that we have speakers every month, and we get together, we discuss business threats and opportunities and constraints that are part of the group. And through the year, I evaluate like a great speaker that I can bring to the TDO group, because you guys just being part of here, you're very successful businessmen. You're great clinicians, but you guys run a business. And it's very important to be in touch. I know that you guys are always updating yourself on clinical lectures, and my job, my commitment here with this group is to once a year, at least in a TDO meeting, to bring one speaker that can really add value to your business skills and how to run a business. And Eric has over 20 years experience in running company. He ran 2 companies as president. And his lecture was a great lecture. You can see the results of what we're doing. You can see the TDO staff group, the commitment that we have with the group. And that's really helped me to have a very accountable team there. And we brought him in. It's our pleasure to introduce Eric Coryell for you. And I hope you guys take a great notes from content from his lecture. If you're missing a printed material, we have some on the chairs. If you guys need any printed material to follow his lecture, we can get from the chairs here in the front, okay? Thank you. Eric?
Thanks. Yeah, I always like it when I get the applause in the beginning. That way when I go home and my wife's like, how'd it go? I'm like, well, I got an applause, so it must have been okay. It's an honor to be here. And I have to start with a story. I was taking my 13-year-old to school the other day, and I said, well, I'm gonna be leaving for San Diego. And she goes, oh, what are you gonna do in San Diego? I said, well, I'm gonna speak. And she goes, well, to whom? And then you have that moment of, you're like, do I explain what an endodontist is, or do I just say dentist? So I hemorrhaged and said, it's just a group of dentists. And her face kind of crinkled up, and she looked at me and she goes, well, you better be good. And I'm like, well, why? And she goes, well, you don't floss your teeth very well, and they're going to get on you if you're not very good. And I thought to myself, more likely it'll be a root canal. But So it is a pleasure to be here. And I want to share with you the things I've learned about teams along the way. We're going to start with a quick word association. So I'm going to shout out a word. I want you to say good or bad, okay? Beautiful sunny day in San Diego. Monday morning. Mixed result, pretty good. What would be bad? San Diego Chargers going 0-16 for the year. Teams. Good. I used to think that. Then I started paying attention, and I do believe teams are good, but a good team in my experience is pretty rare. Very often, if you really objectively looked at most teams, whether it's a family or a work team, they're not very functional. Usually very good people with very good intent, but at the end of the day, they don't function very well as a team. So what I want to share with you today is what I've learned along the way about what's required to really get a team to function, because I think there's a lot of myths around teams. And to get them to function is very often requires different behavior than that which at least I was taught or were accustomed to. So know that a lot of what I'm going to share today is very contrarian. At times you're going to find it pretty uncomfortable. That's normal. My goal is not to get you to drinking the Kool-Aid. I just want you to see it from a very different perspective, because in your own way you all lead teams, and I want to give you some tools that will actually help you lead those teams better and get those teams to become more functional. Okay? So with that, I want to kind of start by talking about teams within the context of organizational structure, because you all run businesses. So I'm going to get my little pad here. All right. Have any of you ever led a company or been a part of a practice where pretty much everybody reported to you? I'm guessing most of you can connect to this, right? Having all your employees report to you. At the end of the day, what do you like about that? What's nice about having everybody report to you? Very little, exactly right. You get immediate feedback, right? What else was nice about having everyone report to you? You know what's going on. Yep, what else? There it is. I'm in control. I can take everything that you were going to say and summarize it in one word. I think the positive is I'm in control. I have this feeling of being in control. I know what's going on. I can influence most things, and that's the upside. What's the downside? It's exhausting. There it is. It's exhausting. It's all on me, and that's exhausting. And I hear the same thing from all leaders, whether it's business, dentistry, insurance, anything. Every leader will tell me, yeah, I like the control. The control's nice, but this is exhausting. It's all on me. And I think that's the typical experience for most leaders. Well, as organizations start to get bigger, as teams get bigger, we start to create a hierarchy that starts to look something like this. Any guesses where this comes from? It's the military. It's exactly right. The Romans did it first. It's the military model. And in the military, you have generals, right? And you have officers, and you have soldiers. And down here, we have the enemy. Okay. So what's the role of the generals? What do the generals do? Set strategy, right? If I were to summarize into one word, I'd probably argue they do the thinking. Okay? They have the vision, set the strategy. What's a good soldier do? Obeys orders, right? We want you to think, but not that much, okay? Really just, we want you doing the doing. So if the role of the generals do the thinking, the role of the soldiers do the doing, what's the role of all these officers? Execute, yep. Tactical, yep. But again, if I were to summarize into one word, I think they take this thinking and they tell the soldiers what to do. Yeah, they planning, execute all those things. But at the end of the day, they're going to take this thinking and tell the soldiers what to do. After they tell them what to do, what do they have to do now? Make sure they do it. That's exactly right. I think they exist to hold these people accountable. This structure is created because I think it allows us to manage accountability. And it's what I call the hold accountable model. Does that make sense? And it allows us to manage accountability. So I want to start by talking about accountability a little bit, because one of the things that's true for all of you is most of the accountability really rests on your shoulders. Good news is you got control. Bad news is that's exhausting. So let's talk about what it means to be accountable. Okay? So I'm going to start with a basic question. If I'm doing what's expected of me, would it be fair to say with regard to that expectation I'm being accountable? If I'm doing what's expected of me, with regard to that expectation I'm being accountable, right? Okay, so that's kind of what it looks like. However, if I am not doing what's expected of me, I can act in one of two ways. I can act in a way you'd say, Eric, you're being accountable. I'm not getting it done, but I'm being accountable. Or I can act in a way you'd say, that's not very accountable. Okay. What does non-accountable behavior look like? Think about your kids or maybe some of your employees. What does it look like when someone's not getting it done and they're not being accountable? What types of behavior do you see a lot of? What? Careless, absolutely. They're not getting it done, and they're not being accountable. They're careless. What else do they do? What? They're evasive. All of a sudden, they kind of disappear. Yep, what else you see? Lazy.
Same problems over and over.
So they do the same thing over and over. That's really the core of what non-accountability looks like. You see them point fingers at all? Okay? Or make excuses? Okay. All those things are non-accountable, right? What's the flip side look like? What does it look like when someone's not getting it done but they're being accountable? What do they do? What do accountable employees do? Well, no, if I'm being accountable, okay, so I didn't get it done but I'm accountable. What do those employees do? You all have employees that are accountable. They may fall short at times, but what do they do when they fall short? Yeah, they tell you, they open up, they apologize, right? And then if you really pay attention, what you realize is they start doing something different till they get it. Isn't that really what accountable people do? I mean, guys, when I go golfing, I'm accountable. I stand on the first tee box. I know what's expected. 280-yard drive down the middle or something like that, right? So I swing away, and the ball drifts off to the right, usually the wrong fairway. Okay. On the next tee box, do I try and do what I did in the first tee box, or do I try something different? I try something different, don't I? I go buy a new driver, drink a pitcher of beer, change my grip, do something, right? This time I swing away and it's a 50-yard worm burner. On the next tee box, do I try and do what I did in the last tee box, or do I try something different? I try something different. And that's really what it means to be accountable. That's what accountable employees look like. All right? They do something different until they get it right. Non-accountable behavior, non-accountable employees do the opposite. They point fingers, they do the same thing over and over. Those are all non-accountable behaviors. So if we can agree on that as a definition of accountability, the question then becomes, how do you hold somebody accountable? Because as leaders of your organizations, you hold people accountable. Okay? How do you do it? What are the steps required to hold somebody accountable? You all do it, right? Yeah, I probably start with that, don't I? I set goals and objectives, tell my employees what I expect of them, okay? So start with the expectations. What do you do after that? I train them, I give them everything they need so that they can be successful in doing what I asked them. Now what do you do? After all that, no, they're still not getting it done.
Share the results.
Yeah, I share the results. I give them feedback. Exactly right. I let them know, are we on track? Are we not on track? Okay. And if we're not on track, okay, I'm letting them know, hey, you got to start doing something different. So maybe now I'll start to beg them, or I'll threaten them, or I'll cajole them, or I'll coach them. I'll do whatever I can to get them to do it, right? If after all that, they're still not doing it, now what must I start to do? Yeah, you fire them and give them an ultimatum, right? Consequence, and if that doesn't work, I have to fire them. I mean, isn't that really it? Aren't those the steps required to hold somebody accountable? I set clear expectations, put feedback mechanisms in place, give them all the resources, training, coaching, everything they need. If that doesn't work, then I start to beg them, threaten them, cajole them, do whatever I can. If that doesn't work, I give them an ultimatum. If that doesn't work, I have to let them go. Okay. So I did that. Till one day I asked myself, gee, at what point along that process did I ever really hold anybody accountable? You can argue I held them accountable when I let them go, right? But up until that point, who really had the accountability? I did. And I think that's true for you as well. You have all the accountability in your practice. If you think about it, who's setting expectations? Yeah, I am. You are. Okay? Who's providing feedback? You are. Who's coaching, cajoling, training, doing all those things? You are. Okay? So I finally realized that, you know what, this whole notion of holding people accountable is really a myth. What I hear when someone says, I'm going to hold someone accountable, what I hear them say is, I've got all the accountability. Okay? And I think that's what's going on in your practice as well. To a great degree, if you really think about it, at the end of the day, you have all the accountability. So what I want to talk about today is, how do you move some of that accountability down so that it's not all on you? Okay? You can never give it all up. I mean, it comes with the territory, unfortunately. But how do I effectively move it down so that at the end of the day, I'm not carrying all the load? Because that's exhausting. So what I want to share with you today are some tools and techniques that'll help you do that. Does that make sense? Because this model works. I'm not here to say this model doesn't work. I mean, if you think about it from a military perspective, did it work for us during World War I and World War II? Okay. I mean, we won, right? Okay. But what's different than those days than now is it's a different world. Okay, I mean, I don't know if anyone saw this on the Discovery Channel, but about 6 or 7 years ago, there was a special called The Hunt for Osama bin Laden. Did anyone see this? So it was an hour-long special. And I'm not sure how I saw it, but somehow between ESPN and ESPN2, there was a Discovery Channel. And it started with the towers going down. And I brought back all the memories. And I had forgotten this, but I don't know if you remember or not, but within 2 weeks of the towers going down, the government came out and said, we know who it is. You know, it's this guy named Osama bin Laden, but don't worry, we're going to go get him. So I went to bed that night not very worried. Okay. Well, in this documentary, what they talked about was what took place during the next 4 years. And it turns out on 3 separate occasions, we found him. On 3 separate occasions, someone on the front line found him. And what do you think the very first thing they did was once they found him? Yeah, they called the superior officer, really. Superior officer started asking questions, and they documented the exchange of information. Once this person had all the information they needed, what do you think they did? Exactly right. They went to this person. And it was crazy. And then it went up, and then it went up again, and then went over, and then down. And in every instance, it took us so long to decide what to do, we lost them. In fact, at the end of the show, those lieutenant colonels we had him isolated, visually verified, right near the border of Pakistan. And we knew if he crossed that border, we'd lose him. And it took the White House 3 weeks to give us permission to go get him. We lost him. Yeah. And it's crazy. And yet, I think it's very symbolic of all our organizations, okay? Whether it's a dental practice or a business, this is what happens. Something in the front line happens, okay? And we end up spending so much time doing this, okay, that we don't achieve effective results. Because in your world, Okay, we have the endodontist, and we have your office manager, and we have your staff. And down here, we have a customer. I always find that humorous. Not everyone always sees the humor in that, but isn't it true though? Isn't what you want? You want your staff looking to your customer and doing the right things on their behalf. Okay, I want you making decisions. I want you taking care of the customers. I want you paying attention. And that's certainly what I wanted when I was in the business world. But I had a discovery, and the discovery I had was this: if I was to look deep inside the heart and soul of this person, which direction do you think they're most concerned with? Do you think they're looking towards the customer? Do you think they're looking towards their teammates? Or do you think they're looking up towards their boss? Boss. Why? That's the person that controls whether I keep my job or not, or whether I get a raise, etc. So like all normal human beings, they're going to be looking up to their source of separation. And all these people are looking up to their boss, and guess what? So are these people. So where is everyone's collective rear end facing? Okay. The patient. That's exactly right. Because we're all looking up this way when exactly what you want them doing is looking at the patient. Does that make sense? So how do you change that? How you change that is you start to get them to start to become accountable to each other. And that's what I want to teach you how to do. Okay? How do you get them to start becoming an accountable team so that it's not all on your shoulders? But before we jump into that, I have to give you one warning, because for 20 years I tried to make this work and it didn't. And what I tried to make work is I wanted them to be accountable, but at the end of the day, I wanted all the control. Doesn't work. Okay? So know as you start on this journey and say, hey, I want to start giving you more accountability, to some degree it means you are going to start to lose some control, and that's scary. Okay? Doesn't mean you lose it all, but you're going to lose some. Okay? It's kind of like parenting. Okay? I have a 13-year-old daughter, and I'm rapidly losing control. Okay? I probably lost it about 13 years ago. Okay? But whatever's left of it's going away really quick. And at some point, you just got to let go. Okay? And that's what it is. Anyone here ever coached a sport out of curiosity? Anyone here ever coached a sport or activity? Some of you have. Well, I do not have the talent or courage you do. Okay? I'm a parent. I know what the other parents say about you. But I love talking to coaches, and coaches will all tell me the same thing. You know, during the game, it's a pretty helpless feeling, because you want to just run out there and tell them what to do or do it for them, but you can't. Okay, and it's much the same thing. Does that make sense? Okay. So with that as a starting point, let's kind of jump in. And what I want to start with is I want to see what differentiates non-functional teams, which are most teams. Okay, good people with good intent. But if you objectively looked at how that team functioned, you would say that's not a very functional team. So what separates those teams from those few that truly are functional versus those very few that are truly accountable? Okay, because I kind of tend to put all teams into one of those three categories. So the best way I know to do this is I want you to forward into your handout, go to page 5. And I want you to take a second and I want you to identify the best team you've ever been on. I once had someone talk about their fourth grade kickball team. I'll hear high school sports teams. Sometimes someone will say it's my family. Okay. Doesn't matter what it is. I want you to think of the best team you've ever been on in your life. Once you have that team firmly in your mind, just if you have a pen, make a few quick bullet points as to what made that team so special. If you don't, just kind of think to yourself, why was that team so much better than the other teams you've been on? And then I want to draw from our collective experience and see if we can identify the common threads that exist between great teams versus the rest. All right, quick question for you. Was it easy or hard for you to identify that team? Show of hands. Who found it pretty easy to identify that team? Okay, a little over half. That's about usually what I get. Was it easy because that team really stood out compared to your other teams? It just comes to mind right away. And if you really think about that team, there's a difference between that team and the rest of the teams you've experienced. That's almost always what I hear. How about for those who found it hard? Was it hard because you had so many great teams to choose from and couldn't pick one? Or not sure if I've ever really been on a great team? Is that crazy? And it goes back to my thesis. Most teams are non-functional. If you've been lucky enough to experience one, it stands out. So let's see if we can identify the common threads that exist amongst those best teams. So what came to mind as you thought about your best team? Camaraderie. Okay, whoops. What else?
Everybody got a pretty good work ethic.
Okay, we had good work ethics. All right, what else?
No expectations.
No expectations?
That we know or have.
Oh, known expectations.
Knowledge and expectations.
Okay, yes, I'm sorry. Yes, known expectations.
Everybody well trained.
We are well trained. Okay. All right, so we have good communication. Awesome. All right, so I'm falling behind here. I missed one. Well trained, thank you. Okay. So we had mutual respect. All right, mutual respect. I heard cared about the patient. That's big. All right, what else?
Everybody has a job and we didn't check up.
Yeah, we knew our job and you didn't have to follow up on them all the time. No follow-up required. What else? We had talent in different respects. All right, what else?
Support and encouragement for each other.
Okay, we supported and encouraged each other. Okay, what else? They accepted the coaching, so they were learners. I'm going to run out of space on this page. Okay. Do you have any conflict in that team at all? Yes, you did. Some people did, some people didn't. Okay. Because you had good conflict resolution. Okay. You think about some of the difficult conversations you may have had or the conflict you had. Did that conflict take place in a group setting? Or did it tend to take place in bathrooms, hallways, subgroups? Group setting. Okay. Show of hands. As you thought about your best team, who had that experience of we had some pretty difficult conversations and even conflict sometimes, and it even took place when the group all together at occasion. I just want to get a feel. So several of you have had that experience. Okay. So we had some difficult conflict in the group settings. Okay. All right. I was once given this presentation, and somebody said, and this is when I was drawing on an easel pad, they said, you know, Eric, you have the handwriting of a serial killer. My first thought was, how do you know what a serial killer's handwriting looks like? Then my next question is, how do you know? No. So ever since I made it a point to put everything in the handout, so you'll never have to read anything I write. So if you go to the next page, go to page 6. I can almost always take all the input I get and put it into these 6 categories to the point where I'm pretty convinced these are universal truths. Okay? So I want to work my way through each one of these, and I want you to think about the best team you've ever been on and ask yourself, did you have these? First and foremost, you had a clear and commonly accepted purpose. Go back to your best team. Was there agreement as to what you were there to achieve? Yes. Okay. All right. I'll be willingly take this bet with you if you want. Okay, no one ever wants to. But here's my bet. The next time you have your staff together, I want you to have everyone pull out a blank sheet of paper, and I want you to have them write down what they think the purpose of your team is. If the answers come close to matching, call me, I'll buy you dinner, restaurant, your choice. Okay. If they don't, you buy me dinner. Okay. Anyone want to take that bet? Yeah. And it's for years, I just assumed my team knew what our purpose was. And then I did this exercise once, and I'm like, holy cow, where did you come up with that? Okay, and it was clear to me. And I will tell you, it is virtually impossible to have a functional team unless there is a crystal clear deal. And it seems so obvious, but you gotta start here. Okay. Do the blank sheet of paper exercise, find out where they stand, and then inform them. Yes, sir?
Did you ever have a staff member not be able to write anything down on a piece of paper?
Yes. They couldn't come, they didn't know, they had no idea. Yeah, I do this with teams on a regular basis, and I run into that a lot. They're like, I don't know. They just don't know. Right? And that's common. And again, it's not their fault, but this is, until you establish that clarity, the team has very little chance of being functional. So yeah.
Did you ask that question of a dental team? What sort of variety would you expect to get? I mean,
well, and so this is the important thing for you is to go into the meeting knowing what you see the answer is. Sometimes they'll orient the answer towards the patient. Well, we're here to provide great patient service. Sometimes they'll say, well, we're here to make money, or we're here to service the needs of the owner, or it can be all over the page. Okay, and a lot of times there'll be subtle differences. You just want to make sure there's clarity.
But sometimes when you get those variety of answers you just said, the owner may say one thing.
Yeah.
But the interpretation of the staff is something quite
Exactly right. And that's your chance to make sure that they are interpreting what your vision is the right way.
different. But what you say and what you think may not be how they kind of read what you're doing.
True. And actually, we're going to talk about that later on. Yeah, and the importance of aligning those two things. Yeah. Okay. So step one, purpose. Number two, you had metrics. Go back to your best team. I'm willing to bet you had ways of measuring whether or not you were successful. Whatever that team was. I mean, even if your best team was a softball rec league and your purpose was to have fun, you had ways of measuring it, didn't you? Yeah. Don't remember how I got home last night. Okay, mission accomplished, right? So, whatever the team was, you knew how to measure it, okay? And you knew whether or not you were on track or you weren't on track. And if you weren't on track, you could course correct it. And so often, especially in a dental practice, there is, we got to put those metrics up. We got to know, hey, are we on track or not? How do we know whether or not we're achieving our purpose? Because if they're not, they need to be able to course correct. But they'll never know they need to course correct unless there's some way of identifying whether or not we're fulfilling that purpose. So the measurements and purpose are very intertwined. Okay? So that's your starting point. The next thing I find on all functional teams, and you guys spoke a lot to this, is there's two things here. One is you had competent people. I've never seen a functional team that tolerated incompetence. And you talked about it in a wonderful way. We had talent in different areas, okay? We had good work ethics. And that's what I mean by competent people. Rarely do I hear people say, we had a great team just because we had a bunch of Michael Jordans, and that's what made us great. Usually we had very good people, they were competent at different things, and together we were pretty awesome. You also had capable processes. It's hard to be a functional team if you don't have processes that enable the employees to be successful. And I think this is where, as leaders, you are taught this is where you need to put most of your time. And it is important. You got to make sure you have competent staff. You got to make sure you have good processes, good software, all those things that enable you to be successful, right? And it's very important. But it's not as important as number 4. The single most important thing if you want a functional team is you need a high degree of shared fate. And this is where the breakdown begins for most teams. What do you think I mean by shared fate? Sorry, what? Buy-in. Okay, they're bought in, yep. What else does it mean to have a shared fate? What do you hear when I say shared fate? We succeed or fail together. That's it. What happens to one happens to all. And until and only when you have that will you have high levels of teamwork. Okay? That's what makes a team a team. In fact, that's my definition of a team. A team is a group of individuals with a shared fate. If there is no shared fate, they will not act like a team. Okay? Say this is my staff right here, okay? And you all have your different responsibilities, okay? So you're responsible for billing, and all of a sudden I look and realize our billing's falling behind. So I bring my staff together and I rip my biller to shreds. Okay? While I'm doing that, what are the rest of you thinking while I'm doing this? Deep down, glad it's not me. Okay? Versus I bring my staff together and say, guys, one of the important things we do is make sure we have enough cash so we can keep our jobs. So it's important we keep billing, down. And look what's happening. I need you guys to get your act together and get this righted, or we're going to have to start engaging in some serious cost reductions, and I might just start with you. And I leave the room. Now how do you feel? Deep down. Just go figure it out. Now, I'm not saying that's the right thing to do, okay? I just want you to feel the difference. And very often, as a leader, I would say, well, you got ABC, and you got DEF, and you got XYZ, and I treat you that way, and then I wonder why they're not acting like a team. You know what the shared fate for most of you is? You know what the shared fate that makes your staff feel like a team? No, it's surviving you. You won't believe what he did this morning. Oh yeah, wait till you heard what he said yesterday. And those become the conversations that make them feel like a team. Okay? I had a boss a number of years ago, and that was our conversation every day. You won't believe what Jim did. And then Jim left. For 3 years we told Jim stories. Even though he was long gone, because that still is what made us feel like a team. We all survived Jim. And that's what created that sense of team, okay? So it can be very powerful, but it's not very healthy. There's lots of other ways to create shared fate. And so I really want you to give serious thought to this. So how do I dial up the shared fate for my staff? How do I get them really being felt like a team and acting like a team? Okay? There's all sorts of ways to do it. Okay? Just out of curiosity, any former military people in here? Anyone have any military background? Okay, what service? Army? Navy, Marine. Fantastic. That's the perfect example right here. Yeah, well. Well, I have a friend who was a former Marine. I called him an ex-Marine once, and I almost did get killed. There is no such thing. I found that out. What's the first 3 months called for either Army or the Marines? What's the first boot camp, right? Basic training. And what do they do during that time frame? Yeah, they freak you out, right? But they break you down. That's exactly. They break you down, don't they? And they make you become a team. You know, my friend talked about the second day they put them through a very rigorous physical exercise. They threw them all in this thing. They ran through mud and climbed things, and it was 2 hours. He goes, the most intense physical exertion I've ever go through. And he goes, I won. He goes, I was first. And I got destroyed by my sergeant because I passed up a lot of my teammates who were struggling. He goes, it took me 2 weeks to figure that lesson out. He goes, those who didn't never got in. Okay? But to this day, if you meet another Marine, is there a connection? Or someone else from the Army? Absolutely. Okay, because you had shared experience. You went through shared situations. You can create shared fate through compensation. You can create through all sorts of ways. But I want you to think about, how do I dial up the shared fate for my team? Because that's the engine that makes it a team. Okay? And a lot of times, without even thinking, I just treat them as separate individuals and then wonder why they don't function as a team. Does that make sense? So if you want a functional team, here are the first 4 steps. You need to make sure there's a clear purpose. You need to make sure everyone understands it. We're on the same page. You need to have measurements that tell you whether or not you're achieving that purpose. And you need to talk about those things. Get together and talk about them. Because the measurements themselves will create shared fate. Okay, we know we're doing good or bad. You need competent people and capable processes. I'm guessing by and large you're there. Okay, and then you need to find ways to dial up the shared fate. You have those 4 things and you'll start to have a team that can function. Yes?
You put up measurements.
Yeah.
And, we never had examples of them, and I was wondering if you would mind the demo of this.
Sure. Well, you can have all sorts of measurements. You can measure number of new patients. You can measure, the billing cycle. How long does it take, to get your money? You can measure customer satisfaction. You can take efforts to gauge how happy are my customers. You can, so it really comes down to what's important to you, and we're going to talk about that near the end. And it can be multiple too. It doesn't have to be one. It can be a variety of different things. You can measure employee turnover. How often are we turning employees over? Is the staff turning over a lot? There's all sorts of things you can do. Okay.
What Louise can do is later, after, we can share with you how we measure your satisfaction with our software. We have a whole series of metrics that may help you understand that. The measurement is really important.
It really is important.
I was wondering if it mentioned all.
Yeah, we measure all these things.
Thank you so much.
Yep. Okay. So that's what's required to get a team to function. And very few teams actually get there. If you want to go to the sacred ground and start to have them taking on higher levels of accountability, you need to move into step 5. And this is where all the antacid starts to kick in. I call this my Rolloid speech, and it's all because of this. Because what you're going to find is, on accountable teams, you're going to find that all real issues are dealt with in a group setting. So we need to start with a definition of a real issue. It's on the bottom of your page. A real issue is any issue, idea, topic, anything that affects the team's ability to be successful. So anything that's going to affect our ability to be successful is a real issue. So if you have a staff member that's got really bad breath, is that going to affect your ability to be successful? Yeah, probably. So that's probably not a good example. If you have but there's a lot of little things that aren't going to affect the team's ability to be successful, right? But if they're not performing, is that a real issue? Yeah. If they're upsetting your patients, is that a real issue? Yeah. Okay. Those things now need to be talked about in a group setting if I want the team to become accountable. It's not the way I was brought up. In fact, as soon as I got into the business world, I was told, Eric, you praise in public and condemn in private. That's exactly right. Where are almost all performance reviews held? Private. Okay? But if I want the team to start functioning like a team, those conversations tend to start taking place when we're together. I'm not here to tell you to start doing that tomorrow. Okay? But I want to teach you how to get there. And the reason it's important is you need to understand the dynamics that keep that from happening. Because it's those same dynamics that destroy your teams now and undermine your staff right now. So we're going to go through a process of understanding this. Okay? Why is it so difficult? Why is it so scary? What's required to make it work? But what my takeaway for this for you is I want you to understand what behaviors you need to start corralling. Because those are the behaviors that are literally destroying your staff teams. Okay? But the ultimate state, if you really want an accountable team, requires that this happens, that we start talking about our real issues together. Go back to your best team. Some of you have had this experience. As issues arose that got in the way of that team being successful, did you ignore them? No. Did you talk behind each other's back? No. Did you go looking to the leader and say, hey, leader, solve these problems? No. Instead, if you really think about it, we talk to each other, sometimes one-on-one, sometimes in a group setting. And that's what made the team successful. So that's exactly what I'm talking about here. If you do that, you get to the last step, which is what I call individual commitment to each other's success. And some of you described this. We had mutual respect for each other. We supported each other. Okay? Go back to your best team. Did you care just as much about your teammates' success as you did your own on that team? You did, didn't you? And that's when teams develop that swagger. I don't know how to explain it, but you just kind of have this edge of bring it on, we can handle anything. Okay? Your staff members start caring about each other so much that they work for each other and they work for you, and it becomes like this. And when that happens, extraordinary things happen. The problem is I've yet to figure out how to walk into a team or a staff and say, okay guys, starting tomorrow, 8 o'clock sharp, I want you all worrying about each other's success just as much as your own. Go. Doesn't really work that way, does it? Okay. But that's what we're looking for. We want the we greater than the I. The only way to get there, you guys, is to make sure we've got a clear purpose. We have measurements that tell us whether or not we're achieving that purpose. We have competent people, capable processes. We have a high degree of shared fate, and we deal with all real issues in a group setting. If you do that, I promise you, you'll get there. So I want to take some time and let's talk about this. Okay, because underneath this very concept is some very powerful things you need to understand, and it will help you understand a lot of the dynamics you see every day going on at the office. Okay? So I want to talk a little bit about the works of a guy named Wilfred Bion. If you go forward 2 pages in your handout, there should be a lion chasing a zebra. Guessing that's page 9. Yep. Now, know in your handout, I got several pages that have lots of content on them. They're called key takeaways. Okay? About 1 year from now, you're going to be cleaning out your office. You're going to come across this handout. Okay? You're going to blow the dust off. All right? And you're going to move to throw it away. Before you throw it away, can you just open it up and read all the pages that say key takeaways? Okay? Because that will have what I think are all the key points that you want to take away from this conference, or from this segment of the conference. Then you can go ahead and throw it away. But just read those pages first. Okay? Deal? All right. So on page 9, I want to talk a little bit about an individual named Wilfred Bion. Virtually no one's ever heard of him, but I'll tell you he's pretty much the founder of all group dynamic thinking. I won't bore you with his bio, but just know he was, he was born around 1900. He was enlisted in the English Army during World War I. He lived outside of London, and he had some very traumatic experiences there that started getting him thinking about how teams functioned. He was actually a surgeon. World War II broke out. He ended up being in charge of a psychiatric hospital in London, where his job was to get the physically fine but mentally traumatized young men back to the front. And he was not a psychiatrist. And so he would sit in on these group therapy sessions, and he started watching all these dynamics play out. And it struck him so much, at the end of the war, he quit being a surgeon, got his degree in psychoanalysis, and spent the last 30 years of his life studying teams. It's brilliant. I mean, he wrote 13 of the worst books ever written. I mean, it's just painful to read them. But once you figure out what he's saying, you're like, oh my gosh, spot on. So I want to share with you what I think the 2 most important pieces of his work are. And if you understand these 2 things, you'll understand a lot of the dynamics you experience at the office every day. Okay? The first we're going to call the theory of herd. The theory of herd had 4 basic premises to it. He was actually one of the first people, at least in writing, to ever document the fact that human beings are pack animals. Okay? Remember studying pack animals? You may have studied pack animals like 5th or 6th grade. Probably studied like baboons or lions or something like that. Okay? What are common pack animal behaviors? They have to defend the pack, right? Packs will look out for each other. What else do pack animals do? They play together. They work together. Yep. What else do packs do? We hunt together. We work together. What else? We survive together. We tend to create a hierarchy. Okay? If you think about it, we do that as humans. Here's an interesting one. What do packs do when someone joins the pack? They have doubts about them, right? It's called an interview. Okay? So we interview them and try and quell as many of those doubts as we possibly can. And once we decide to bring them on and we accept them on, okay, so now they're part of the team. Now what does the pack do? What does your staff do when a new employee joins? They do what? They take their time. They're checking them out, right? But when we start to say, okay, you're in, now what do? We train them. What do we do what? I think if you really think about it, what we do is we start to normalize them. We assimilate them. Okay? Your staff members will start to tell, this is how we play the game. This is how we roll. Don't say this to the doctor. Do this, don't do this. And they literally acculturate that person and bring them on board. Okay, they normalize them. Resistance is futile. Yes, exactly right. But if you think about it, that's what happens. And that's what happens throughout your whole life. Who normalized you first in this world? Parents. Okay? If you grew up in my family, you'd see the world a little bit the same way I would, wouldn't you? Okay? Religion does it to you. It gives you a context for how you view the world. If I grew up in a Buddhist environment versus a Muslim environment versus a Christian environment, I'm going to see the world slightly different. It gives me a context for how I view the world. Your friends did it to you. Everywhere you've ever worked, your school did it. All those places in some way normalized you and they shaped you. And what he started to realize is how fundamentally and thoroughly group-oriented we really are as human beings. Okay? Think about it. When one group hits shaky ground, maybe life gets a little shaky at home, we start to gravitate closer to our other groups. Okay? Life gets really scary when all our groups hit shaky ground. Okay? We are fundamentally and thoroughly group-oriented. If you think about it, all our values come from the groups we've been a part of. We do almost all our learning in groups. So we started to realize that while we are autonomous human beings, we carry our groups with us, and they influence how we act, whether or not those groups are even present. Okay? I may decide I want to be successful in business, so when I go back to my 30-year high school reunion next year, I can prove to everybody I wasn't the loser they predicted I would be. Okay? Here's a group of people I haven't seen in 29 years, yet I may still carry them with me, right? Okay. I'll buy a car. There's a certain part of me that says, I wonder what other people are going to think if I'm driving that car. Right? As we act, we think about and carry our groups with us, whether or not they're even present. But probably the most important discovery he had, and it happened shortly after the end of World War II, was the discovery that connection to a group is literally a requirement for human survival. And it's kind of fascinating how they discovered this as part of his research work, but they were studying orphanages. And as you can imagine, all across Europe, there were thousands of orphanages. And the goal of an orphanage is just keep these kids alive until they get placed, find a loving home. And so they would track mortality, and the infant mortality in most of these orphanages was very low, but in a few it was really high. So they went to go find out what's going on. And they went in with the assumption of high level of disease, lack of food, incompetent leadership. Guess what they discovered? Touch. That's exactly right. They were all grossly understaffed. So what we now know to be true is if an infant isn't physically held enough during his first year of life, the baby will literally die. The scientific term for it is called anaclitic depression. There has to be a physical connection established at birth and through the first 7 months of life. Okay? If not, the body chemistry breaks down and the infant literally dies. Okay? It's called anaclitic depression. You may have heard the term failure to thrive. That makes sense? Same thing. Okay? Guess what? It's true with us as adults as well. except for now it's more of a mental configuration. It's called Musselman's disease. It's named after the doctor who first did the research on this. The research was done during the Vietnam War. And in all war settings, if you're captured by the enemy, you're put behind enemy lines and you're in a POW camp. And in POW camps, you're cut off, you're isolated, no phone calls get through, no letters get through. Okay. Well, the Viet Cong did what any country does. When a letter comes in, they open up and read it, looking for intelligence, and they throw it away. However, in this instance, if it was a Dear John letter, does everybody know what a Dear John letter is? Okay. Kids these days don't know. They don't even know what a letter is. Okay. They must have like, Dear John tweets or, right? For those of you who don't know, a Dear John letter is a letter of separation. Sorry, honey, I'm leaving you for the guy down the street. Guess what they did whenever that letter came? Gave it to him. Guess what they found? Yeah. Most of them died within 2 weeks. Okay. Because what kept them alive in these horrible conditions was a connection to a group that wasn't present. And when that connection broke, their will to live ended. They gave up. Stopped eating, their immune system shut down, killed themselves. Okay. We need to be connected to other people. The second we lose that connection to other people, we literally die. Do you know anybody who's not connected to other people? Okay, they're all dead. No. I have a sister-in-law who's diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia, and so she's on medicine most of the time, she's fine, but she every now and then will hear voices and she becomes suicidal. And she'll describe it as, I feel like I'm surrounded by fire and I'm cut off, okay, and I want to die. And I was sharing this with a friend of mine as a therapist who says, oh yes, Eric, that's anyone who's suicidal. Okay? The second we feel disconnected from everybody, we will take our lives. Okay? So I don't share this to depress you, okay? But you need to know our strongest biological need is our need to be connected to other people. Okay? The second we lose that connection, we die. So why this is relevant is beyond realized we operate out of fear of separation. And we will go to extraordinary lengths to avoid the experience of separation. Okay? Sometimes that fear of separation is physical. I'm afraid of being kicked off the team. I'm afraid of losing my job. But more often than not, it's mental. I'm afraid of being ostracized. I'm afraid of being deemed a non-team player. I'm afraid of being thought less of. And it drives virtually all our behavior. If you want proof, go back to high school. How many times did you ever do something or say something you didn't want to do, but you did just to stay in good stead with a group that was important to you? Okay. Every day. You may not remember. Any of you have teenagers? Okay, just watch them. Okay? The group that's important to them changes every day. But whatever that group is, they will go to great lengths to avoid separation from that group. It changes what clothes they wear, what they say, what they do. Well, guess what? It's no different for us as adults either. We're just a lot more sophisticated about it. You go into your staff meeting and say, hey guys, we're going to do X, Y, Z. Okay? And you've got an assistant that's thinking to themselves, that's really stupid. And what do you think they're going to say?
Yes.
Great idea. Because I don't want to lose my job. Okay? Happens all the time. All right? So why is this relevant? What Beyond discovered is there's a one-to-one correlation between low levels of fear of separation and high levels of team performance. Go back to your best team. When you were on that team, did you have a relatively low fear of separation? Interesting. It is. And let me walk through it. The fear of separation is weird at first, but it's crazy. But I've never seen an exception to this.
It's not a motivator.
What?
It's not a motivator.
What do you mean it's not a
Fear
motivator?
of separation.
Oh, I think it is.
But you say low is good. Wouldn't high be a motivator if you were?
Oh, okay. It's a subtle difference. And let me walk through this next segment and see what you think. But I know exactly what you're thinking, and it takes some time to kind of explain this whole motion. Okay. But once he discovered this, he went out, okay, and started to figure out how do you minimize fear of separation. In fact, he spent the last 20 years of his life trying to figure out how do you minimize fear of separation. And in 20 years of work, he only found one way to do it. And the only way he found ever that truly minimizes fear of separation is to deal with real issues in a group setting. Talk about which that is normally unspoken. Okay? And it's very important you understand this. So we're going to actually see if we can't prove this together. Took him 20 years. We're going to do it in about 20 minutes. So I thought we'd play the Family Feud. Okay. So in order for me to do this, I need a volunteer. All I'm going to do is just use your name in vain for about 20 minutes. It's not too painful, I promise. Anybody? Okay. What's your name, sir? Kevin? Okay. All right. So we're a team. And Kevin's been our star for years. Up until about 2 months ago. All of a sudden, he's developed a really negative attitude. Okay. He's kind of become a cancer on the staff. Okay. Is this a real issue? It is, isn't it? That's going to affect our ability to be successful. So I went out and studied 100 other practices very similar to ours and had a problem very similar to Kevin. And I asked everybody, I said, what'd you do to deal with your Kevin problem? Tallied up all the results. Top 5 answers are on the board. Let's play the feud. Okay. I actually used to play this out like the feud, but the kissing thing got kind of weird, so I stopped. So as teammates, what might we do to address Kevin? What might we do? We could ostracize them, okay? So we could avoid it. And I'm going to put this under a broader category. We could do nothing. We're not going to touch the issue. We're going to distance ourselves from him. We're going to ignore it. We're going to avoid it. We're going to do nothing. Survey says, number 1 answer. So on the next page of your handout, for those of you who have pens, I'd highly encourage you to write this down because I think you're going to find this helpful. We're going to do nothing. We're going to avoid it. We're going to ostracize him. We're going to do anything other than touch the issue. What else might we do? Fire them, okay? So as teammates, what's the first thing we do to go get someone fired? Go to the boss. Survey says, number 3, go to the boss. What else, bless you, what else might we do? We go talk to him. One-on-one confrontation. Survey says, number 4, one-on-one confrontation. Or we could have a group confrontation, right? Survey says, number 5, group confrontation. What else might we do? Talk him into quitting. I like that. Promote him. Oh, you took away my joke. It's perfect. What else might we do as staff members? What do we do? When someone's not performing, what do we tend to do? Talk behind his back. That's exactly right. Talk behind his back. Number 2. I heard someone say we could do the job for him. That's a form of ignoring the issue. So I put that in number 1. But talk behind their back. In fact, I think there's a sequence, you guys. Tell me if you don't see this as well. When a real issue starts to arise, I think we start with number 1, don't we? We tend to ignore it. We avoid it. Maybe we distance ourselves from this person. We'll do the job for them. But I don't want to touch the issue. Over time, my anxiety starts to build. So where do I go next? 2. You see what's going on with Kevin? You see what's going on with Kevin? You see what's going on with Kevin? And we all start to talk about Kevin behind his back. And at that point, I think we start to make a decision. Should Kevin stay or go? If we think maybe it's time for Kevin to go, where do we go next? Go to the boss. Hey, Kevin, did you know Kevin did this? I'm just letting you know. Okay? And my hope is that Kevin will go away, and I look to the boss to take care of it. If we don't go there, we tend to stay here at number 2 and just keep trashing him behind his back. Or we'll go back to number 1 and ignore it. If we're going to go somewhere new, where's the next logical step? Number 4. Hey, you know Kevin pretty well. Why don't you go talk to Kevin? Okay. How often do you think teams really do number 5? Almost never. I very rarely see it. I think it's, in my experience, I'd probably say it's less than 5% of the time. Less than 1% of the time. Which ones are the common ones? Where do you think people spend most of their time and energy and effort? 2, 1, okay, maybe 3. If I were to combine these 3 together, if this is less than 1% of the time, what percent of the people's time, energy, effort, focus are made up in the first 3? 90, 95. That's what I always hear. I'm almost convinced it's a scientific fact. Whatever's left is here. I'm not really worried about the numbers, but would you agree the vast majority of time, this is where we behave is above that line? So the interesting question for me is, what happens to fear of separation as we engage in each of these behaviors? And let's just kind of do a quick run through and see what it tells us. Because if you buy into the notion it matters and affects the teams, it's important we talk about this. So we're going to start with number 2. Bion calls this pairing. So you're going to hear me refer to number 2 as pairing. P-A-R-I-I-N-G. I was a great pairer in my day. I loved to pair. I paired at lunch. Okay, I'd go out to lunch. You pronounce your name Sunia? Yes. Pretty name. So I'm going to go to Sunia and say, hey, you want to go to lunch? Sunia's like, sure. So we go to lunch and we're talking about the weather and our upcoming vacations, and all of a sudden our attention turns to Kevin. And for the next 15 minutes we rail. Here's what he's doing, here's what's going on, here's what should happen, why doesn't he have to take care of it, it's so obvious. We diagnose the whole situation, we solve it. We leave lunch in lockstep agreement. The interesting question is, what happens to my fear of separation? Does it go up or does it go down? It goes up. No one gets this right. Why does it go up? Exactly right. What did I learn about Sunia? She's a backstabber. Okay? So the next time I'm in a meeting with her, what do I need to worry a little bit about? What do I say? Because if she doesn't agree with what does I say, what's she highly likely to do? Go stab me in the back. Okay? It's crazy because really what I feel in the moment is my anxiety goes down. It feels good to know that someone else sees the world like I do. We're in agreement around Kevin, but I need to be careful around her, don't I? You all have that with some of your friends. You all have one of those friends, that is a backstabber. And you love being connected to them because you find out the inside scoop on all the rest of your friends. But you're always very careful, right? Because I don't want to expose too much of us to them because they may go out and trash us. Fear of separation goes up. Make sense? All right, how about going to the boss? I'm going to go Messiah the boss. Okay, so who's going to be my boss? Okay, Angela. So I'm going to go to Angela. Hey, Angela, I've been working for you a long time, and I got your back. And I'm sure you're seeing what's going on with Kevin. Problem is, everyone's starting to talk about you because you're not dealing with it. I just thought you should know. And I leave her office. She goes home all stressed out. Her husband's like, what's wrong? Well, I got to fire Kevin tomorrow, but this is why I make the big bucks. So she comes the next day and pulls the plug on Kevin. What happens to my fear of separation? Does it go up or down? It goes up. Why? It could happen to me. Okay. Now the nice thing is, with respect to this issue, my anxiety goes down. Problem has been solved. And I have no skin in the game. I can go out to lunch with Kevin a few weeks later and say, I can't believe she fired you. What a jerk. Now, the reality is I never had to go to the boss in the first place. Okay, you all learned this in your first job. My first job was working at a Super America gas station up in the Twin Cities. And my buddy Rob got fired 2 weeks after I started. So what did I figure out really quick? Okay. Don't do what Rob did. Okay. Don't take lunch, eat it, not pay for it. And then I started to realize, I wonder what else will get you fired. So I started watching. And in about 2 to 3 months, I had it all figured out. Okay? I knew what the boss liked and didn't like. I had the game figured out. Well, I'm willing to bet each of your staff members all know how to get fired from your practice. They all know. They've heard all the urban legends, all the sacred cows. They're all walking around with a working definition of what it takes to get fired. Okay? It takes them about 2 to 3 months to figure it out. All right? Yeah?
Go to the boss, what if they say, I quit because I don't like, working with this person, and tell you that you're showing favoritism for that person.
Oh, I think that happens a lot. And I think what happens is they're going to look to you to solve the problem. And if you don't, they don't know what else to do other than quit. Yeah. So what I want to show you is how do you give them other options so that it's not all on you. Okay? Because they'll eventually messiah you. You didn't solve it, so you're no good, and now they bolt. And I think that's exactly what happens a lot of times. I think a lot of times that's why people do quit. Okay? Because there's this expectation that as the boss, you're going to solve all the problems. Okay? Yeah, good luck with that. Okay? But that happens a lot. How about doing nothing, avoiding, ignoring it? For most of us, it's an anxiety-reducing move. I don't want to confront my good friend Kevin, so I'm going to do nothing. But over time, what happens to my fear of separation? Does it go up or does it go down? It goes up, right? All right, real quick, what observations can you make based upon everything in front of you here?
Why would the fear of separation go up?
Oh.
If actually the person, you know that nothing's going to happen to you. They're not going to fire you. They're not firing Kevin.
Oh, that's a great point, and I apologize. I was going to skip over this. So, well, a few reasons. It's interesting. And the assumption is that you think fear of separation will go down. What I've discovered is this: is that I start to worry that, hey, maybe I'm going to take the fall for Kevin. I start to realize I'm on a team where we don't talk about real issues. Maybe I'm a real issue. But the real lesson for me came in that I got brought into a company once because the morale was really low. And nicest owner on the planet. I mean, great guy. And the company had been around for a long time. And I think the last person that I gotten fired was like 13 years ago. And they were fired for embezzlement. And I got brought in because morale was down, and the owner was a good guy. He didn't, Harold's a problem, yeah, but he was a superstar 30 years ago, so we don't talk about Harold. And they never really talked about any real issues at all. It just all got swept under the rug. So as I'm talking to all the employees, I'm like, why is morale down? And I would hear these stories like, well, if you do this around here, you get fired. If you do that around here, you get fired. If you do this, you get fired. I'm like, are you kidding? You have to embezzle. Okay. And then something dawned on me. In the absence of knowing, what do people do? They make it up. They make it up. And a lot. If you talk to a lot of people, you'll hear everyone say this at some point in time. I had a boss I didn't particularly like, but I respected that boss because I knew where I stood. Okay? And people need to know the deal. And when they don't know the deal, when issues aren't dealt with, fear of separation actually rises. It's crazy. It's paradoxical. And I think a lot of this really is paradoxical. Okay, it's counterintuitive. Okay, and I know I'm kind of rushing through this, you guys, but just for time's sake, I got to get to some other stuff. But if you buy this for $1, if this resonates with you at some level, based upon everything in grayish blue here, what observations can you make?
Totally viable.
95% of the time,
That's it.
you're doing nothing to help the team or the business.
Exactly right. 95% of the time, you're doing what you do to minimize your own anxiety, but the price that's paid is fear of separation goes up, and as fear of separation goes up, the team fractures. Okay? This is why most teams are dysfunctional. It's true at home, it's true at work. Okay? Say I'm having real issues with my sister, I'm afraid of putting on the table because I think the family's going to blow up. So instead I talked about my sister to my parents. Does my relationship with my sister become stronger or weaker? Weaker, right? Instead, I talk to my brothers about my sister. Does my relationship with my sister become stronger or weaker? Weaker. Instead, I do nothing and pretend it's not an issue. Will my relationship with her become stronger or weaker? Weaker. And here's why this is so important, you guys. The foundation of every team is trust. The foundation of every team is trust, whether it's family, whether it's work, anything. At the core, at the bottom of every team is trust. If we do not trust each other, we have no chance. I know this is a scary thought, but pretend I was on your team, okay? And so we're teammates. Let's just say as real issues arise, I go running to the boss. Will you trust me? You won't, will you? Okay, let's just say instead of that, as real issues arise, I just talk behind your back. Will you trust me now? No, pretend, okay, instead, let's just say as real issues arise, I do nothing. I stick my head in the sand. I pretend it's not an issue. Will you really trust me? These three things, you guys, destroy trust. Destroy it. And that's why it's so important you understand this. What I want you walking out of here today is how to start getting your team on the right basis, the purpose metrics and all that stuff. But the other thing you need to do is you need to start changing behaviors. And the most destructive behavior to any team, especially in dental offices, is pairing. I want you to cease and desist all pairing activity. I'm going to teach you how to do this. Because there is nothing more destructive to teams than when people pair. Think about it for a second. Every time, when Sunny and I go out and have lunch, we pair all the time. But every time I pair, I become untrustworthy in her eyes. Because she knows deep down I will do it to her. Okay? Imagine I hear this psycho speaker and he says, don't pair. So we go out to lunch and she wants to start talking about Kevin. And I say, you know what? I don't want to talk about Kevin unless Kevin's here. I think if you have those concerns, you need to talk to Kevin. She's going to be like, what up, dog? We don't do that. Okay. She may not invite me to lunch anymore, right? But deep down, what's she going to do? She'll trust me. Because if I want to talk about Kevin behind his back, who else want I talk about? Her. Okay? You're right. It'll take her a while. I mean, she'll start to think about, hey, I probably shouldn't pair her, but her first reaction will probably push me away. Okay? But they will figure it out. Okay? Now, whether that ever amends our relationship or not, I don't know. Okay? But I'm not going to do it, and I'm not going to tolerate my employees doing it. Okay? It changes everything. Because it's interesting when you think about it. Why do we pair? Does pairing solve anything? It does for a moment. That's the anxiety. In that moment, I feel good. But do you ever go home after a day of trashing your teammates and your spouse says, how was your day? And I'm like, oh, I had an awesome day. I spent the whole day just trashing my teammates. It was great. And you think everyone feels good after doing that all day? No. Okay? And so the question is, why do you do it? I do it because I don't know what else to do with my anxiety. I don't know where else to go. Okay, so I get that short-term hit, but it doesn't solve anything. In fact, it destroys things. Okay? So we're going to talk about how to do that here in a second, but I want you really to focus on the destructive power of pairing. And we're also going to talk about how you need to stop taking on all the real issues. If I start to take away these things from the top, now I'm down at the bottom. Okay? What's happening to my level of anxiety as I'm thinking about confronting my good friend Kevin? Is it going up or down? It's going up, isn't it? What do you think happens afterwards? Could. My experience is it tends to be one or the other. Depends. I mean, maybe the issue with Kevin is he just swears a lot. You know, so he's in the office dropping F-bombs all the time. So I finally decided to pull him aside one-on-one. I tell him, hey, I'd really appreciate it if you wouldn't do that so much. And he could say, wow, I didn't realize there was a problem. I'll be more careful. Thank you for bringing it to my attention. I appreciate you telling me. I owe you one. In which case my fear of separation will go down, right? Or he could say, F you. In that case, my fear of separation might go up a little bit. Okay. It's a facetious example, but you get it. Okay, it depends. Who knows how it goes? What do you think is happening in my level of anxiety as I'm thinking about bringing this issue up in front of the whole team? Just perfect. Way up. Why do you think we never do it? Yeah, well, I'll explain why here in a second, but you're right. Assuming a healthy process, and I'll teach you that here real quick, you're going to find that fear of separation goes down. Okay? Now, for most people, the idea of group confrontation is terrifying. It was for me at least. I mean, we've all had an experience where we've been a part of a feeding frenzy, right? Where we've had a group turn on someone. Okay? For me, it was 5th grade, April 22nd, 2:30. Still in therapy. But I know their names. LinkedIn is cool. No. But we've all experienced it, and it's terrifying. It's awful, okay? And now we got reality TV and all these interventions. That's not what I'm talking about, okay? What I'm talking about is a healthy confrontation. And even the word confrontation itself has got very negative connotations. Okay, I always grew up thinking confrontation bad. It wasn't until I heard someone say, you know, Eric, a confrontation is nothing other than a search for the truth. And as soon as he said that, it kind of changed my perspective around confrontation. It doesn't sound so scary when someone says it that way, does it? I'm just here to search for the truth. I'm going to share my truth. I'm going to understand your truth. He goes, but the key, Eric, is you can't go in thinking you have the truth. Because if you go in thinking you have the truth, can you search for the truth? No. And that's the problem. Most of the time when I go to confront, I think I have the truth. That means I'm right. So what does that make them? How well is this conversation going to go? All right. That's why I can't pair. Okay? If I go to Alana and I'm just going to say, you know, Alana, I'm going to talk to Kevin about this, but I just want to see if you see it too. Okay? Do you see what's going on with Kevin? And she goes, yeah, I see it. Can I now go search for the truth? No. Because what mode am I in right now? I'm in right mode. I validated it with someone else. You know, Alana sees it too. And if I'm right, what does that make Kevin? How well is this going to go?
How is this any different than your surviving gym. So I'm looking for potential supporters at that, my own little path that we all hate to.
It's a great example. The question is, how is this any different than me surviving gym? And that was, all we did was pair. We paired against gym all the time. And that's what made us a strong group, but we were not a healthy group. Because here's the irony. I don't tell the rest of the story. So we spent years trashing gym. If only gym was this, if only gym was that, we'd be great. Guess who replaced gym? Me. Guess what the conversation 6 months later was? If only Eric this, if only Eric that. Okay? So the group literally pulled against the leader. Jim was our boss. And the next thing you know, they turned against me when I became the leader. Okay? And it happens all the time. Okay? And that's what I'm going to talk about next. And that's the importance for you guys to not take on all this stuff, because they eventually will turn on you. That makes sense? Okay. So just due to time constraints, I'm not here again to say, hey guys, start dealing with real issues tomorrow in a group setting. You're probably not there because you don't have the necessary level of trust. What I do want you to do is I do want you to start engaging in the right behaviors that will start to build that trust. So first and foremost, you need to stop and desist all pairing activity. As leaders, you can no longer tolerate it when you find someone talking about somebody else. Okay? And here's how you do it. I'm going to teach you a trick I've learned, and it's something I've noticed that all highly functional teams engage in and all non-functional teams don't. It is the magic move that all accountable teams do and the rest don't. And it's going to sound insanely simple. But whenever you are together with your team or whenever you have a team member coming talk to you, I want you to enforce the following rule. It's on the next page. It's on the bottom of page 11, I believe, or 12 actually. We're going to skip here. I call it the law of speaking for yourself. It is the single most important thing I can teach you. And I want you to start paying attention because you are going to notice this all the time. Have you ever noticed people will start speaking on behalf of other people? Well, I heard someone else say so-and-so. Okay? No longer allowed. From now on, whenever anyone talks, they must talk on their own behalf. They cannot talk on the behalf of another person. There's several implications to this. First implication is I don't allow pronouns anymore. No more we, they, or our. Have you ever had an employee say, you know what our problem is? Our problem is we're not following the process. What's wrong with that statement? Who's our? Okay. Is it Kevin? Is it Alana? Is it Sunia? Okay. I'm thinking to myself it's Kevin, but I'm afraid to say Kevin, so I say it's our problem. What's Kevin thinking? He's talking about Alana. Whenever anyone uses a pronoun, I say, who's we? Who's we? Is we everybody? Does that include me? I mean, I can't say, you know what, no one's following a process. I'm not doing it. I don't see any of you following the process. That's allowed, but I cannot say we're not following a process. I have no idea who we is. I don't allow they or our. So I want you to learn to listen to pronouns. And whenever anyone says a pronoun, clarify it. Because pronouns are how your employees avoid real issues. Make them name the pronoun. Ready for the second one? This one's even a bit more obscure. I don't allow questions. Because 95% of the time, questions are statements. Okay? And you will have people come to you with questions all the time. All right? And behind that question is almost always a statement. So I'll give you some examples. So someone will say, don't you think we should? As opposed to what? I think we should. Why am I afraid to say I think we should? Because I could be wrong. I'd have to be accountable. I could get rejected, fear of separation. If you start paying attention, you will notice your employees constantly come to you with questions. Don't you think we should? What do you think about this? So what I want you to get in the habit of is when they come and ask you a question, say, rather than ask me a question, why don't you make a statement? Or what do you think? Oh, I guess I think this. Okay, I can do something with that. No more questions. The only question that's allowed is a question that's truly data gathering they honestly don't know. How far is it from the sun to the moon? How do I enter this billing code? Whatever it is. It's something I genuinely don't know. And I promise you, you're going to find that less than 5% of the time is a question really a question. Most of the time, it's a statement. Okay? But here's why, above all, this is such an important rule. Okay? Because I think at the end of the day, and we'll talk about this in a sec, but the greatest anxiety around having a group conversation is I'm afraid of hurting someone else's feelings. I don't want to embarrass them. I don't want to make them feel bad. Okay? I think deep down that's true for most people. Okay? And I will tell you as an adult, you have never been hurt by being told the truth. None of you have ever been hurt by being told the truth. Okay? I happen to have a particularly high fear of rejection. Okay? You can tell me I have a high fear of rejection. That doesn't hurt. You know what hurts? You know what hurts when someone tells you the truth? It's the judgment. It's the judgment that does the hurt. It's not the truth. It's the thought that you may think less of me because of it. You tell me I have a high fear of rejection and you think less of me for it. That's what hurts. Do you agree with that? It's not the truth. It's the thought of being thought less of that hurts. It's the judgment. It's the judgment that creates the hurt. Well, I will tell you, it's virtually impossible to judge someone if you speak on your own behalf. Okay? So I'm going to speak to Robert. I want you, or I should probably pick someone in the back so I can broaden this up. What's your name, sir, in the blue shirt? Simon? Okay. So I'm going to talk to Simon. I want you all to pretend I'm talking to you. Okay? And we're going to do two scenarios. And I want you to tell me which one's more judgmental. Okay? Scenario A. Simon, I've noticed you've not been very engaged in our meetings lately. And I'm just wondering if what we're talking about isn't that important to you. It's hard for me because when I sense you check out during the meeting, I'm having a hard time maintaining my own focus and concentration. Okay? Scenario A. Scenario B. Simon, we've noticed you've not been very engaged in our meetings lately. And we're just wondering if what we're talking about isn't that important to you. It's hard for us because when we sense you check out during the meeting, we're having a hard time maintaining our own focus and concentration. Which one's more judgmental, the first or the second? Second. Was it even close? What was the difference? Who's we? And you've been talking about me behind my back, and oh my gosh, I don't even hear the message. All I can hear is the we. Okay? I was in a meeting once, and this guy turned to another individual and said, you know, Glenn, perceptions are that you. And he started to finish the sentence. And to me, it was like a slow motion cartoon film. I'm like, stop! You know? And he finished the sentence. And Glenn went postal. And I literally had to wrestle the meeting to a halt. And finally, the speaker said, well, you know, I had this perception of you, and I was afraid my word didn't carry enough weight, so I thought you should know that a lot of other people think the same way too. And Glenn's like, how can I ever trust you? You've been talking about me behind my back. All the speaker had to say was, Glenn, my perception is this, and I would have been fine. But with the we statement comes judgment. And it creates all sorts of angst and frustration in the office. So as you are meeting, I want you to go enforce these rules. Okay? No more questions that aren't questions. No more pronouns. And I want everyone to speak on their own behalf. And I want you to watch for pairing and crush it. As you do those things, you will find that trust starts to build and the office staff will start to function. Okay? These are the behaviors that destroy the team. Those are the behaviors that do it. Okay? So that's what I want you to go look for. The last piece to this puzzle talks about going to the boss. So let's just talk about this notion of going to the boss a little bit. Because just by the very structure of your practice, you have this going on, right? And it's not intentional, but you end up creating parent-child relationships. You're the boss, you're the parent. They're the employee, they're the children. You tell them what to do, they do a good job, you pat them on the back. They don't, you slap their hand, right? And in this structure, if I'm this person here, and I'm having a problem with the assistant over here, what will I do? Go to the boss. Say, hey, boss. And the boss, being a good boss, says, all right, I'll take care of it. And they go take care of it. The next time I have a problem, what am I going to do? Go to the boss. And they take care of it. And I'm going to keep doing this until the day the boss fails to meet my expectation. And at that point, I turn on the boss. Okay? And now I start talking to these people about the boss. All right? That's what happens. All of a sudden, I realize the boss doesn't walk on water after all. And they're no good. So I turn on the boss. Now imagine if we had a functional and accountable team, and I'm here, and I'm struggling with my teammate over here. What would I have to do? Go talk to them, right? That's called being an adult. Is it easier or harder to be an adult? It's harder. Okay, it's harder. But that's the behavior I'm looking for. You know what? If you've got a problem with this person, okay, let's go do it together, but you're going to go talk to that person. Because I am not going to take on your problems. Because every time you take on their problems, you become Messiah'd. Okay? You become the Messiah. And they start to look to you repeatedly as the person is here to solve all anxiety and take away all pain and suffering. What's the problem with coming into the Messiah? Let me give you a hint. Okay. A crucifixion. Okay. My favorite definition of a leader is one who's yet to be crucified by their followers. Okay. It's true. And yet, that's how your employees look to you. You're the Messiah that's here to solve everything, and the second you don't, they start to crucify you. You're no good. Yes?
So how does that actually work?
Yeah, so
are you
let's,
going to talk about that?
yeah, we're going to talk about that. So how do you change that, okay? And this is one of the secret little lessons I've learned in it, and it doesn't solve it all, but it'll get you a long way away. So we're going to, again, just for time's sake, I'm going to skip some of this stuff, but I want you to go to page 16. And this is an exercise I really, really want to encourage you guys to do. It's going to take you about 2 hours, but it's a very important thing to do with your staff, and it's going to help you address this issue. So what I would encourage you to do is get a projector and get a laptop, get one of your staff members that can type really well. And I want you to sit in a room and say, okay, guys, let's make a list of all the decisions we have to make. Okay? What are all the decisions that we have to make? Okay? In order for us to fulfill our jobs. So you're going to start listing things like when do we raise prices, when do we switch insurance carriers, when do we switch suppliers on product XYZ, what hours we work, how do we greet employees. I mean, I want as many, you should get between 100 and 200 decisions. Okay? And then you're going to go through this decision tree matrix, and you're going to code them right in front of them. And you're going to put a 1, 2, or 3, or 4 in front of each one of these decisions. Some of those decisions are your decisions. You're the owner of the business. They're your decisions. At the end of the day, that's mine. Okay? So you may come to this decision and say, guys, this is my decision. Some of these decisions, you're like, you know what, I'm okay with you making it, but before you make it, I always want to talk about it. At the end of the day, it's still your decision, but let's talk about it. If you want to change what kind of toothbrushes we carry, that's fine, but let's just talk about it. I want to make sure you've thought it through. That's a level 2. So level 2 are, before you make the decision, check in with me. If I have an office manager and she wants to let go of one of the staff members, you know what, you're accountable for that team, so I'll let you fire that person. But before you fire them, can you just talk with me? I want to make sure you thought it through well. But at the end of the day, if you think they need to go, it's your call. Then there are level 3 decisions, which is, these are your decisions, but can you let me know about it afterwards? Okay? I just need to be in the loop so I can support you, I can know what's going on. Guess what level 4 decisions are? I don't even need to know. Okay, I have done this numerous times. Guess what there ends up being more of? 1s, 2s, 3s, or 4s? 4s. Almost always. What do you think the employees think there's going to be most of as we start? 1s. They all think every decision's yours. It's amazing. I have to tell a story real quick because I just had this happen to me. That was about 6 months ago. A small company, and the owner was a control freak. And he's telling, he and I coached him on this ahead of time. He goes, yeah, they're going to all be 4s. And I said, yeah, it's usually what happens. So we get together, got all the employees, made the list. And I said, guys, what do you think most of them are going to be? They're all like 1s, and I'm being all smug to myself thinking, they'll be 4s. You watch. So the first one he goes, and the leader goes, well, that decision's a 4. And the team goes, that's not a 4. It's like, what do you mean? He goes, don't you remember this and this happened? You wouldn't. He goes, oh, I guess that is a 1, isn't it? So he changed it to a 1. The next one he goes, well, that's a 3. And the team's like, that's not a 3. What do you mean? Well, oh, I guess that is a 1. Okay. I'm not making this up. He had 108 decisions. 90 of them ended up being 1s. By around 50, he knew he was in trouble. You know, and the employees are all looking at me in the side going, thank you, you know. He sees it now. And he realized that, and he goes, you know what, and so he made a commitment, and I got to follow up with him, that he was going to take 10 of these 1s every quarter and make them 2s, you know, and start to let go. Because he was becoming the constraint on the organization. And he had to let go. So it's a very valuable exercise for him to see. But here's how this works then. So once you've got all these things coded, and you'll have some 1s, and you'll have 2s, and some 4s, and 3s, etc. The next time an employee comes to you and goes, hey, what do you think about this? The first thing you're going to ask yourself is that a level 1, 2, 3, or 4? And if it's a 4, you're like, what are you doing here? We've talked about this. That's your decision. Okay? If it's a 3, same thing. You know what? Didn't we talk about this? Why don't you tell me after you make the decision? If it's a 2, I'm glad you're here. Let me ask some questions. And if it's a 1, I got it. Thank you. I'll let you know what I decide. Okay? If you don't do this exercise, if nothing else, just get in the habit of whenever an employee comes to you, just start by saying, just so I can better understand, tell me what it is you want from me. Because the danger that you don't see is whenever the employee comes to you, their assumption is it's now yours. They've just given you the problem. And you don't even realize it. They walk away now thinking you're going to take care of it. And if you don't, they turn on you. Okay? It's an extremely powerful exercise. It should take about 2 hours. You can do it in 2 separate meetings. You can make the list of all the decisions. You can go off and code it, but you got to go through it with them. You got to explain, why is it a 1? Why is it a 2? Why is it a 3? Why is it a 4? And over time, it can shift. As they step up, you start giving them more. Okay, cool. You've demonstrated you can take on more responsibility, now move it. So we talked about in the very beginning, part of what I want to teach you how to do is to move the accountability down to your staff. This will help you manage that process. You can't just go back tomorrow and say, okay guys, it's all on you. Okay? But this will start to give you a way of structuring it and moving it down. You can identify, you know, this decision here is the office manager, so this is Laura's. That's her decision. But with regard to me, it's a 3. I want you to let me know about it. But at the end of the day, Laura, it's your decision. Okay? This one's a 1, it's mine, it's Eric's. Okay? This one's a 4, any one of you can do it, or whatever it is. So you assign a level, an owner, and then whatever the decision is. And it's an extremely powerful thing to do, yes?
Have you found a healthy ratio of 1, 2, 3, and 4?
It's a great question. I don't know that there is ideal. It really comes down to what you want. You know, at the end of the day, that one owner I told you about had all 1s. That's him. That's what was comfortable for him. But he decided that he didn't want that. So he said, you know, this doesn't feel right. So I don't know there's any set. Is it what you want? Because as the owner, I like the control, but at the same time, I don't want it all on me. So if you got all 1s, you're right there. And then you got to decide, is that what I want? Does that make sense? Okay. Is that helpful? Okay, there's one more piece I want to get to, and I think it's really important we get to this in this group here. So I'm going to shift over to that, and then we'll come back. I want to make sure I have time to answer all your questions. But you guys are all leaders. And I had an opportunity to be a leader as well, and I never really appreciated how important that was. I liked the control, I liked the money, I liked the responsibility. And it wasn't until near the end of my career, back when I used to work for a living, did I realize I really had an impact on a lot of people. Okay? And I made a difference in other people's lives. I had the opportunity to make a difference in other people's lives. And fortunately, I had this experience. I had someone come up to me once, and he goes, Eric, have you ever had a boss that kind of sucked the life out of you? I'm like, yeah. He goes, has it ever occurred to you that you might be that boss? I'm like, no. But it forced me to think. It forced me to think, gee, you know, I could be that boss for all I know. Do I create an environment where people can't wait to go to work, or am I that boss that people just kind of dread working for? And so I started to pay attention. I'm like, what separates those people who have great practices from those people where it's a place that's really stressful to work at or it's unhealthy? And my dad was a tech chair, so the Vistage organization that Luis talked about was what he did. He would have 15 CEOs in non-competing industries, and he would facilitate this group. So as a teenager, I'd be at the dinner table, and I'd have to listen to him talk about all these CEOs. And I remember thinking, who'd ever want to own a business? It sounds horrible. And as a teenager, it was a pretty boring conversation. But I started to realize that some of his members were clearly great leaders, some not so much. And then as I got in the work world, I found the same thing. I had one or two great bosses that I'd kill for, and then the rest, not so much. So I started to wonder, what differentiates that? So what differentiates the dentist that creates that extraordinary practice from those that may not be so extraordinary? So I think I have an answer, and I want to share it with you because I think it's important. So let me start with a basic question, and if you want to follow along, and I apologize for my lack of artistic skills, but go to page 18. Is that right? 18. You got to kind of pretend that this is an iceberg. Okay. My daughter takes great pride in the fact that her artistic skills exceeded mine when she was in about first grade. Okay. Here, we'll help the visual. We'll draw some fish. She says they all smile, so we'll make them smile. Okay. Would it be fair to say that you get paid to make choices? It's a weird thing to think about, but I really think it's that simple. You get paid to make choices. You make choices while you're working on a patient. You make choices in the office. You make choices like, do you confront or do you avoid? You make choices by how many hours you work, what time you show up for work. Do you reward loyalty? Do you reward performance? Do you think your employees watch all the choices you make? Oh, yeah. They watch them all. And I liken the choices to what's above the waterline, which is only 10% of the iceberg. The choices you make is what they see, and they watch them all. And they catalog them, that's true. And here's what I think they really do. They take all those choices, and they catalog them, and they develop a spin or a theme that answers the question, what do you stand for? And I think you get all your power and ability to lead based upon how your employees answer this question. Okay. Here's how it plays out. Let's just say Kevin is sitting on a major choice at work, and everyone's kind of waiting for him to make that choice, and he knows it's a big choice, so he goes to the mountaintop, meditates for 40 days, comes back, brings his staff together, says, guys, I made my choice. And being the gifted orator he is, he lays it out with crystal clarity. They ask questions. We spent a half an hour on this choice. Within 15 minutes of that meeting breaking up, what do you think the rest of the staff is doing? Talking about it. Okay? And they're literally interpreting his choice. Why did he decide to do that? How is it going to affect the organization? How is it going to affect me? How is it going to affect the practice? Okay. Yeah, that's exactly right. Now, here's the interesting thing. What are they going to believe? What he said or their interpretation of what he said? Every time. Doesn't even matter what he says. And it's the answer to this question that separates the great leaders from the not so great. And I'm going to prove it. Now, I don't know if this will work for you. I don't know how many bosses you've worked for. If you haven't worked for a boss, pick a parent or a coach or something. But I want you to think of a really bad boss or a really bad teacher or someone or a bad parent. Okay? Can everyone identify someone who's had a position of authority over you that you would say was not so good? Okay. Don't say anything out loud, but I want you to ask yourself, what do they stand for? Okay. Can you answer that question? What do they stand? Don't say it out loud, but what do they stand for? All right. Now I want you to do the opposite. I want you to think about teacher, parent, boss, anything any position of authority that was really good. Can you identify someone who's had a really significant positive impact in your life? Now I want you to answer the question, what do they stand for? Okay, don't say anything aloud, but what did that person stand for? What I didn't tell you in the beginning is I have ESP. I can read your minds. I know the answer to both those questions if you give me 3 guesses. Okay, ready for this? I'm willing to bet the answer to your bad boss, parent, coach, whatever, was one of three things. When you asked yourself, what they stood for, you said to yourself, I have no idea. Or you said, nothing. Or more than likely, you said, they stood for themselves. I get it? It's crazy. Get it every time. The answer to your good boss, parent, coach, whatever, was not one of those three. I know that's a cop-out. But guys, I think that's the divide. That's what separates those extraordinary leaders. Those people who stand for something bigger than themselves versus those who don't. Okay? The problem is you make so many choices, you can't control how people spin it. Your choices come from your core purpose. And your core purpose comes from who you are, what you believe. Okay? And our core purpose, and so I'm going to get a little metaphysical on you here for a second. So if this gets too creepy, just kind of check out for a few minutes, okay? But if all you ever heard was good music, would you know it was good music? You wouldn't, right? You kind of need to hear bad music to appreciate good music. It wasn't until I got to the 1990s that I realized just how good the 1980s music really was. Okay. All right. If you're God and all you know is love, would you know it's love? It's a crazy one to think about. I mean, my first reaction is, well, of course, if you're God, you know. I'm like, I'm not so sure. If all you know, all you are is a loving vibration, would you really know it's love? So just maybe, and I'm crazy enough to believe that I would then create a physical world and allow myself to manifest through it so I can experience the opposite. Maybe in order for me to fully appreciate what love is, I have to experience fear or hate or abuse or anger. Maybe in order for me to fully appreciate what self-actualization is, I have to experience dependency or codependency. Okay? Just maybe I create this physical world and allow myself to experience things I wouldn't be able to otherwise. I'm crazy enough to believe that there's two parts to us. There's our brain or our ego, whatever you want to call it. And there's our soul or our spirit. And it's from these two spaces I think our core purpose comes from. If you really think about it, our brain or our ego, whatever you want to call it, really only has two purposes. One purpose is to create. If you think about it, everything that exists in this world was created by our brains, by a thought. It started with thought. The other purpose is to ensure our survival. That's what our brain does, is it ensures our survival. From the time we're born to the time we die, that's its primary mission, to make sure I survive. And it's the Maslow's hierarchy of needs. I'm going to make sure I have enough food, safety, shelter. What's next? Beer, money, okay, love, all the way on up, okay? And it's fear-based. It can never have enough. It can never have enough. It can never have enough. The most miserable people are the people that are still in this space and they have it all. And they just want more because it can never be enough. But it's important. I mean, it's doing exactly what it should. It's keeping us alive, and it will do that until the day we die, and it passes. Then there's another part of us that's bigger than that. It's our soul or our spirit. And I think it's from these two spaces that we exist and function. So when I first became president, you guys, I never would have admitted to this then. But now that I look back, or if you were an employee that worked in my company, you would have watched the choices I made, and know what you would have concluded? You would have concluded that Eric wants to look good to the board of directors. You would have realized that Eric just wanted to show that he was the right choice. Eric wants all the employees to like him. Eric wants the company to do well so that it would look good on his resume. Which space was I in? And you know what? There wasn't much for people to follow. At the end of the day, I was about me. So they had no choice but to be about themselves. They worked for a paycheck. Because that's what I was about. That's all that was left for them. Okay? If you look, and it's kind of a fun exercise to do if you ever go on Google and say greatest leaders of all time, you'll get all these lists. And the crazy thing was when you look at them, you start to see there's common threads amongst all the people on these lists. And then what's really crazy when you look closer is some of those people we would consider very heroic. There's Abraham Lincoln's on there, Gandhi's on there. There's lots of people you'd say those were truly great leaders. And there's some people who are like Adolf Hitler's on there, Stalin's on there. You're like, well, how did they get to be on there? And then when you start to look further, what you start to realize is what makes a leader is that they stood for something bigger than themselves. Did anyone by any chance ever read that Steve Jobs book? Okay, I'm not much of a reader, but for some reason I read that book. I'm old enough, so when the Apple IIc came out, I was in high school. So it's kind of interesting to read. Based upon that author, and I know people disagree, but the guy was a jerk, okay? And I think at some level there was some form of mental illness. But he was brilliant. If you really think about all that he was able to achieve, he changed the music industry, he changed the movie industry, he changed the computer industry. And what made him able to do that was he stood for something bigger than himself, to the point he didn't let his own ego get in the way. He didn't care whether or not people liked him or not. He was all about achieving whatever his vision was, and that's what makes a leader a leader. Okay? You want a great practice. You want employees that are going to give you their unconditional work. They're going to give you the discretionary effort. You need to stand for something bigger than yourself. And it doesn't matter what it is. It's just got to be real. It's got to be real to you. Because the greatest leadership lesson I've ever learned is you get what you tolerate. Okay? If you have non-performing employees, you get it because you tolerate it. If you've got employees that treat your patients well, you get it because you tolerate it. Your core purpose is defined by your intolerables. Who you are as a leader is defined by what you will and will not tolerate. I did this exercise once, and I highly encourage you to do it at some point. I took a group of people that knew me well, and I had them write down what they thought my intolerables were. Now, a definition of intolerables is on the bottom of that page. An intolerable is something you'd fire somebody over. If you really think about it, I don't know if any of you have your list of values in your office. Has anyone ever done that? Okay. I did that. We went off site and came up with our list of values. Guess what? Those aren't your values. Those are your aspirations. You want to know what your real values are? Your real values are things that you would fire somebody over. That's what you stand for. Those are the only values that matter. Okay? If you have an employee who repeatedly treats your patients poorly and they're still there, you don't value treating patients well. But if you let that person go, that's a value. I will not tolerate you treating my patients poorly. If you don't perform exceptional work and I tolerate it, then I don't stand for that. Your real values are what you stand for, and that's what sets the culture in your office. It's what you will and will not tolerate it, and they know. You ask them, what do you think gets you fired around here? And the answer to that is what it is you stand for. Because that's the only thing. That's the only thing you stand for. And I can't tell you how many times I would have told you I stood for something, and when that got tested, I backed down. In my day, I told myself I'd get fired. Well, I better not say what I felt. Well, did I really stand for it? If I stood for it, I wouldn't care if I got fired or not because I believed in it that strongly. Does that make sense? This goes back a number of years, 25 years. I was a buyer. It's my first job out of college. I was a buyer. And we went and me and my boss went and visited all our top suppliers. And our best supplier was actually Newport Beach, California. Great place to go visit a supplier, especially when you live in Wisconsin. So we came and visited. I will never forget this. We walked in there and there was a receptionist, and on the wall behind her were the words, "Let the marginal employee work across the street." And we're looking at that going, what's that? And our sales guy came and took us back to his office. We go through the cafeteria. Guess what's on the wall? Let the marginal employee work across the street. And we're like, what is that? And the guy's like, well, you need to talk to our owner. We're like, can we? He's like, sure. So on our way out, we met the owner. She was probably in her early 50s at the time. And we said, what is that? And she goes, well, I decided if I'm going to own my own business, I want to be surrounded with people who are passionate at being extraordinary at what they do. And I don't care whether they're a janitor or vice president of sales, you have to be driven to be exceptional at what it is you do. And my boss goes, you fired people because they weren't? She goes, oh yeah, but I'm okay with that. Because before any employees started, we would sit down and talk about what those words meant to them and what it meant to me. Guess what she got? Exceptional employees. Okay? Now, you may not like that example or story, but that was true to her. That's what she wanted, and she got it because she would tolerate nothing less. And there were so many times, you guys, I had a bad employee, but I'd tell myself, well, I can't get anyone better. So I tolerated that. And then I ended up with that. Because I'd tell myself all these negative fantasies of what would happen. I might get sued or all that kind of stuff. And really what was going on is I was afraid. I was afraid to deal with that issue. So I'd conjure up all these horrible things that would happen if I did deal with it. And once that got greater than my fear, I was off the hook. So I think in order to lead, in order to create an extraordinary practice, okay, you need to find what it is you're about. What is it you care about so much that it's greater than yourself? Why are you doing what you're doing? Because of course what you're doing in part is to pay the bills and earn a living. That's true for all of us. But I also think there's a greater space. And as you can find that space and you live fearlessly from that space, that's when you can start to create an extraordinary practice, an extraordinary office. Because you get what you tolerate and everybody knows that. Okay? So just to kind of summarize today, we started in the very beginning about the whole notion of accountability, because I think in most practices and in most businesses, the accountability really rests on your shoulders. You know, you never signed up for that. I just wanted to be a great endodontist, and I want to help people. And all of a sudden, I got to manage this, and that's not so fun. As I knew a dentist, and she said to me, she goes, you know, I don't mind managing. It's just the people I hate. I'm like, that's perfect, okay? But it's true. And so it is the hard part. And because at the end of the day, it's your house on the line, it's your career on the line, you have to have the accountability. You can never give it all up. But what I want to share with you is the possibility that you can give some of it up and you can engage your employees on a very different level so that it's not all on you. And the way to do that is start to build a functional team. Okay? And so the starting point is the acceptance of the fact that you're going to lose some control, and that's scary, I get it. You don't have to give it all away, but you got to get comfortable with losing some. And then what you want to do is you want to set your team up to be successful, and to do that, you got to start with these 4 things. Okay? Make sure that there's a purpose, that they know what the purpose is. Be able to measure it, find ways to measure it, and talk to them about it. Okay, get competent people capable of processes on, but the big one here, you guys, is find ways to dial up the shared fate, both positive and negative. Every little thing you can do, the metrics will create a shared fate. That starts to put your team in a position where they can function like a team. Now you need to change the behaviors. Okay, first rule, no more pairing. If I find any one of you is talking negatively about another one of you, that's it. I'm not going to tolerate that. You may give them one warning, but don't tolerate it. Stop tolerating it. You know when someone's doing it as soon as they say we. You're like, who's we? And you will now know that they've been pairing. Okay? So they need to know that's no longer okay. If you've got an issue with your teammate, you're going to learn to talk to that teammate about it. All right? So crush the pairing. Second thing you wanted, so it all goes back to this right here. So you want to crush the pairing. And now you want to stop taking on issues that really are their issues. Of course there are going to be issues that you got to decide. And that's why you want to do that decision tree matrix. Make it clear what's yours, what's mine. And if they're coming to you with their issues, put it right back on them. Otherwise they will forever be dependent on you. And the problem is the more dependent they are on you, and this sounds terrible, I don't mean it this way, but the dumber they become. The more you solve their problems, the dumber they become. And it just is a reinforcing cycle. Okay? I was at a party a few weeks ago, and someone was, a friend of mine, he's got a lot of friends. He's got a lot of kids. And they're pretty good kids. And I'm like, well, how do you do it? And he goes, well, I learned a trick early on. He goes, whenever any one of them acted out, I would punish them all. And that, you talk about shared fate? Okay. As soon as one of the kids started acting up, the rest were like, don't do that, we're all going to get in trouble. Okay? And so I won't get into those, but they learned what they could and couldn't do, you know, what dad didn't and didn't like, and they coached each other. You know, and the one kid would tell the little one, don't do that, dad's going to come whip you, you know. But that works. It creates shared fate, okay? And it also sets the deal. And that's much what you're doing here. You're going to create a shared fate, and you're going to set the deal. What they can and cannot do. Does that make sense? Ultimately, then, that forces you into this space where we start to deal with your real issues, okay, and you minimize fear of separation, okay? And then to set yourself up, what I think is probably the most important thing is really spend time trying to identify this space in your life, because you do make a difference in a lot of people's lives, not only your patients, okay, but your staff. And in order to really create that extraordinary environment, it requires you to cultivate this space. What is it you stand for? Because I know more people that retire miserable. And I retired from my working career back when I used to work in corporate, okay? Pretty miserable. I look back, I'm like, what did I do? And I realized I had a chance to influence a lot of lives. And I spent most of my time worrying about making more money or looking good or all those kinds of things. And then when you get to the end of the journey, you realize that's not all what it was about. Obviously, you need to do all that. But the real joy comes from this. So I just invite you, if you don't know what this is, spend time listening, identifying, and finding it, and then acting fearlessly out of it. Why are you doing this, besides just making a living? And I think that is really what sets the tone in your office, to go create those wonderful teams. So I'm perfectly willing to stay around for anyone who's got questions. I think we have a few minutes left. If anyone has questions now, I'm gladly answer them. Is there any question? Yeah.
What about being just open with the team? Say, hey, I went to a CD conference.
Yep.
I have something in writing.
Yep.
I've got a handout. I want you all to be on the same page with me. Let's talk about this.
I would love it if you did that. And I'll let you want to speak to that?
No, it's just we will invite Eric. There will be a presentation like this for the staff. If we have the staff here, there will be, I think, at 3 p.m. It's on the schedule. There will be a great opportunity for the staff.
Yeah. So if your staff's here, invite them to that session. But if you want, you are more than welcome to photocopy this. If you want a hard copy, give me your email address. I would love it if you go teach them. I don't know if you can make the video available, but I think it's super powerful to teach them all these concepts and talk about it. And just talk about what pairing is and all that kind of stuff. They will be happier for it. They will be. I think it's a very powerful thing to do. So I'd highly encourage it.
Thank you.
Oh, you're very welcome. Yeah.
Pairing is really bad in show staff.
Yep.
How do you go about soliciting information that will want to find the problem or give you information about it so you have to get that information without making them feel like this is pairing?
Yeah. That's a very difficult, I don't know if anyone heard the question, and this really becomes difficult because now as a leader, how do I get information so I know what to do without pairing, okay? Because if I cut it off, then they may not feel like, hey, they can come to me to get that kind of stuff. So realize as a leader, you are not on the team, okay? So it's a different deal, okay? Because you are on the team, but you aren't on the team. You have a higher responsibility. I'm not okay with you talking about this coworker behind that coworker's back with anyone on that team. So I don't want you going to the other assistants or whatever, talking about them. But since you are not on the team, you can go have those conversations.
So you take that responsibility on yourself, so it's not on that other.
So, right.
Teammates don't feel that person.
Right. The danger is you don't want to become the Messiah to deal with all those issues. So that's what you got to watch. Because if they're constantly looking to you to solve all the performance issues, then you become Messiah. So what you want to do ultimately is get them to create a process, and I can show you how to do this, how they can start talking to each other about performance. How do we get them talking to each other as they have problems with each other? And that's really the solution. So that they're not having to go to you. It's just kind of like the kid example. Learn to have them talk to each other about their stuff so that the dad and mom aren't having to take care of it. Does that make sense? Okay. Yeah.
So let's say there's group consultation. You just say employee A, there's an issue with employee A.
Yep.
And then you have all right, let's talk as a group. It's like you're just basically calling them out in the group.
Okay, and so this is where it's tough only doing this in 2 hours, because you can't do that right away, because what keeps that from happening is what I call a psychological contract. There's an unwritten rule on your team right now that says, I won't talk about you and you don't talk about me. And that exists in virtually every team, because I'm afraid if I talk about you, what can you now do? What's it now okay for you to do? Talk about me, okay? And that's why teams don't talk about this kind of stuff with each other. So you can't just start tomorrow doing this because that psychological contract's in play. So what I would start is I want to build the trust. So I'm going to work on all these things I talk about. When it comes time for this, and I'll give you this real quick. When it comes time to actually have these conversations, here's the key thing to understand. At times in your practice, you've had performance issues, right? Yet how many of those employees ever seem to think that they're the performance problem? Isn't that crazy? I wrestled with this for years, and I finally figured it out one day. Here's the issue, you guys. The performance conversation is always a conversation about the gap between two things. In the gap between expectation and reality is the performance conversation. So when you want your employees to start talking to each other, or even when you talk to your employees about performance, the first thing you need to do is you need to establish agreement around expectation. And I will tell you, 80% of the time, here's where the problems are. Because we're not in agreement around what is acceptable and what's not acceptable. So part of this is establishing, okay guys, we have to agree as a group what is acceptable behavior in this office. And you can have everyone identify what it is to them, and you put it on the board, and you vet it out. But we now have to agree to that. Now we need to find a mechanism around which we can give feedback to each other of whenever the reality is deviating from that, we talk about it. And if you can learn to break all performance conversations into those three pieces, either clarifying expectation, sometimes they don't see reality for what it is, or they don't understand the impact of the gap. And all performance issues fall in one of these three categories. There's different expectations, they have a different understanding of reality, or they don't understand how important it is. Okay? So that's what you're going to want to do, okay? Is guys, let's establish agreement around expectations around behavior in this office. And then give feedback to each other of, hey, when they are violating that deal. And then it becomes much safer that way because there's a framework for it. Does that make sense? I would put this all in writing. Yep. Yep. Then you can have the conversations. Yeah. But I'll tell you, before you even get to this, you got to start creating the trust. Because if you think about it, having this conversation in a group setting isn't so scary if I truly trusted everybody. If I knew that they were here to help me, then it's not so scary. But the problem is I don't have these conversations. I don't trust everyone. I don't trust they have my best interest at heart. Okay? So that's why I want to emphasize building the trust first. And then you can move to something like this. A lot of this stuff is actually documented in the handout, because I knew we wouldn't be able to get to all of it, so it's kind of outlined in there. Okay. Other questions? Yeah.
On your afternoon for the staff,
yeah.
It's going
to be a little bit different. I'm going to harp on pairing a little bit more and what I'll call staff behaviors. I'm not going to do the leadership piece, but I'm going to focus on the pairing, but the rest of it will be the same. But I want to talk about the behaviors that they engage in that causes problems. I'm going to talk about Messiah from their perspective and not your perspective. Okay, yeah.
I had a question regarding the measurements.
Yes.
Besides having like surveys to patients and
yeah.
I don't know, maybe some reviews
right.
for patients, what other suggestions?
Well, again, it all depends what you think the purpose is. So you can have some kind of financial metrics if you're willing to share that. But what's important to you, you may talk about number of new patients or patient turnover. You can talk about cycle time in the office of how fast a patient comes in to how quick they get out. I mean, you just got to decide, hey, what's truly important to me? What do I want the customer experience to be? And as you start to visualize the customer experience, then you can start to identify which metrics are important to gauge whether or not we're delivering that. Or the financial experience, whatever it is. Other questions? All right, yeah.
So I like removing the idea of moving we and our, but I guess as a manager or boss, sometimes you kind of have this kumbaya mentality of, hey, I want it to be together. I don't want it to be what I like.
Wonderful question.
Is there a fear of if you get too much into where they're thinking in the I mode, that everyone becomes a group of individuals, and not only that, but you're undermining your original.
Yes.
Where you said it's a bad leader.
Right. Man, I wish I would have addressed this when everybody's here. It's a wonderful question. The question is this whole we versus I thing. It's two different concepts. When they are outside the team, I want them talking we. We're awesome, we're terrible, whatever. It's when we're meeting and talking to each other, we're still a we, but I want to hear your own thoughts. I want you to speak on your own behalf. But I want you to have that sense of team, but it's not in conflict of speaking for yourself. Does that make sense? Yes, you speak for yourself, But when you're outside, you can use we and they all day long when you're outside the team. But when you're interacting together, everyone speaks on their own behalf.
Okay, and the last part of that, thank you very much.
Sure.
The last part of that question is, I don't know about everyone else's office, but usually you've got the strong, outgoing personality.
Yep.
And then you may have the worker bee who doesn't talk a lot or voice her concerns.
Yep.
So she doesn't want to say I.
Right.
So the loud, outgoing one thinks they're speaking for the person has the issue.
Right.
I mean, I don't know how to address that specifically.
That's a difficult one, because so what we know, social science have studied this for a long time, and people by age 6 either learn to draw things in, think about it, and then talk, or they talk and then think. Okay, and the world gets divided in those two. So obviously, I talk and then I think. All right, and a lot of times I'll say something like, "Oh, that's an interesting thought," and some people have trained themselves to think and talk, and so in those meetings, you're going to have the people that talk right away, and the other people will start bringing the world inside, and then they'll talk. But unfortunately, it's 3 days later, and it's too late. So one of the things you want to do, 2 things. One is do not allow the talker to speak on behalf of other people. That's what I talked about before. You say you can't speak for that person. Okay, but you can set the deal as I do expect to hear from everybody. They just need more time to think through their thoughts. So before you have a meeting, you may want to put an agenda. Guys, we're going to talk about this. I want you all to come prepared to be ready to share your thoughts on this and this and this. And give them the 2 or 3 days that they often need to be ready to talk. But then you have to have the expectation, you know what, you're on the staff, you're a contributing member, you need to talk, you need to play. Just don't let someone else talk for someone else.
If you're getting the kind of the crickets in the room,
Yes.
that situation, will you call that individual out?
I do, and so what I often do is I often say when there's a lot of silence, I say, help me interpret the silence. I'm not sure how to interpret the silence right now. I don't know, are you guys scared to talk? Or, help me understand what is actually going on right here. Because I don't know what to do with this silence. Because silence means there's an underlying issue that's not being talked about, so we got to get to that issue. And it does not mean total agreement. I often will assume that, well, I don't say anything, so I can go. So I want to always address whatever is immediately going on, and just describe it without judgment. I got to admit, I've watched in this meeting that only so-and-so and so have talked. The rest of you haven't talked. So help me understand what's going on, of what's made that happen. And then you got to get them to talk. Yeah, no problem. Yeah.
I just wanted to share something with that. When I do have my meetings, I often will have my office manager make an agenda.
Yep.
And everybody knows what
we're
it's
gonna
going
talk
to be discussed about. And usually I have, an administrative section to discuss, and the people in the administrative section will elaborate the questions or what we're going to be talking about there.
Right.
And the same thing for the clinical part, because I do have in the clinical part someone who is very quiet, who hardly ever says anything. But then she goes to them and they say, what issues you guys have here? And sometimes they are much more amicable to speak with her in that sense, but then we bring it up into the meeting, and it is easier to get that person to sort of participate into the conversation, to engage them in the area that they are.
Right. Which I think is a wonderful thing, is at least you're getting out at the table. You just got to be careful, because that person then starts to speak for them, and that's dangerous. So you just want to watch that a little bit. Okay, I get it. I understand what you're doing, but you just want to be careful, because you don't want that person to become their spokesperson. Now they're going to go messiah that person if they're not careful. That's the one thing you just want to watch for. That's all. Yeah.
Question regarding, you want to address as a group. I'm with another partner, and it's just we have staff that go in and out different times.
Right.
When do you find time to address everybody as a group?
That becomes a big challenge, especially in the dental world, because you got patients. Okay. So you have to wait till staff meetings and do it. And you just got to work really hard to make those meetings full of real stuff, as opposed to fluff and stuff. If you find yourself doing a lot of information sharing during those meetings, find ways to do information sharing other ways. And we want to use that time for our real conversations. But that's when you want to do it. So you just really treat that time preciously, and just make sure you're not doing information sharing during that time, or minimize that, I should say. Because it's hard to get that time. I get that. I work with a few chiropractic offices. They have the same issue. Just can never get everyone together. So they end up doing Saturday mornings, which doesn't always go over very well. Yeah.
Is there any set data or anything that supports, like in an office setting where we do huddle each morning and then we have staff meeting once a week? Is there any set defined, I don't know, protocol that shows that, less is more and more is better.
Oh man, you do what, because I more often than not work in organizations, and so there it's easier for them to meet. And the teams that really get functioning do just what you do. Every day they have a huddle. Because if we're a team, we need to know what's going on in each other's world. So what does the day look like? And I'm falling behind in billing or boom, boom, boom. And then they can really help each other. So a daily huddle, even if it's 5 minutes, I think is necessary. It's fantastic you do that. And then you take on the longer term, bigger issues in your weekly or monthly staff meeting. I think that's ideal. So but they need to be together talking, okay, as much as possible. And as much as possible, you want their office space next to each other as well, too. Because it's harder to pair when they're all right on top of each other. So that kind of stuff. So I think that's ideal. I don't know.
Also, just with that daily huddle, say start of the day, end of the day, both.
If only if it's beneficial, as long as it's valuable. If you find that it's not adding value or people start dreading it, that's usually an indication it's not valuable. Bag it. But beginning of the day, end of the day is good. I mean, the end of the day is, hey, how do we do usually? What learning from the day. Beginning of the day almost always is, what do we got ahead of us? How can we help each other? We're in each other's worlds. I have one company that does a midday. They do a beginning of the day and a midday, which is kind of a course adjustment. You just got to find out what works for you. I don't think there's any set rule, but I love the daily just get together because it makes us start to feel like a team. Because I know what's going on in your day, I know what's going on in your day, I know what's going on in your day. And it's a powerful thing to do.
I just wanted to touch on that a little
Yeah.
bit. We actually had a consultant come in, which I know you never know what you're going to get. With
Oh yeah, I am one too. So
he gets curls up here and
Yep.
there, and one of the big ones, we actually had a sit down and they told me what I did well and what I didn't do well, which was hard. Almost every one of my staff members ended up crying, so I don't know what that means. But it actually, and she told me that. My consultant said that. She's like, everyone's going to cry, don't worry, this is how it happens.
Yeah.
But it was actually really good. And one of the things that we got out of it was the morning huddle was good for me, but it wasn't good for them.
Oh,
Because what I
interesting.
was doing was I was sitting at home afterwards doing my reports and writing up notes, and I'm creating just a complaint list. And then in the morning you're going over that, hey, we can't do this, we can't do that. And they were leaving just drained. So one of the pearls that she kind of gave us was, in the morning, try as hard as you can to be as cheery and positive as
Set
you
the
possibly
day.
can. Get everyone just in, again, kumbaya mentality.
Right.
And then at the end of the day, you have a clearing, and essentially, and this has been great for us, where you literally go around the room and you say, what went well, what didn't go well.
That's fantastic.
And that way you're kind of addressing it every day, and you don't have to have this big meeting where, again, everything gets built up, and you're not driving home with it either. And it's been good for me, too, because
Cool.
you didn't realize how much was
That's
going on.
awesome.
So I don't know if that helps anyone else.
I think
but
that's
it's
really
been
good.
awesome for us.
That's good. Thanks for sharing.
The huddles are more like a defensive posture of how we're going to tackle this day, get through it.
Yeah.
And then we kind of, the staff meeting, we address new business, other business.
Yeah, bigger stuff, bigger picture stuff.
But it's exactly what you said.
Yeah.
And also the frequency, because I find if it backs up, problems just exponentially get worse over time.
I totally agree. And things fall apart. And yeah, absolutely. That's great. Okay, well, I'll hang around if anyone wants any other questions. I'm more than glad to ask. Thanks for staying. Thanks, you guys.